Hello and welcome to Some of My Friends Read Comics. We've got Vince.
Practice your bump and grind, lady.
We've got Chris.
I'm schizophrenic, but the cool kind.
And I'm Kia. Hello everybody, welcome to the show. Today we are reading about a Marvel comic book character, a superhero as a matter of fact, who is probably one of the more unknown ones. He's never had like a TV show or a movie. I don't know if he's even appeared in any of the cartoons or anything, but it's Moon Knight. Would you guys know about him if you didn't read comics? What is your familiarity level with Moon Knight? Vince?
I knew he was Marvel's Batman, and I think Bendis was talking about making a Moon Knight series for forever, before he finally ended up making it like in the early 2010s, 2011. And so I think he tried to make him happen a few times. Marvel's tried to make him happen. He was in our Marvel Knights episode, which is like
That's
our take
right.
on the Defenders. But other than that, I'm like, I don't really know a lot about him, and this book did not help me learn that. But
Yeah, okay. Chris, how about you?
I don't know. I mean, I remember seeing him in a trading card, like way back in like the 1992, trading card series. But I don't even know if he had a series at the time. If he did, it was one of those that like would never show up. Even because I went to like a comic book store that was like mostly a card games, cards store in the early 90s. So like I don't think they ever carried Moon Knight. So it wasn't until years later that I read any of this stuff. I think it was in Marvel Knights that he showed up in a couple of Knights books, and I was like, oh, okay, this guy's kind of lame, honestly. But I bought that Marvel Essential Moon Knight series like in 2006 or so, and I just really loved Bill Sienkiewicz's artwork. I was like, oh, this is actually good. So
Yeah, he does the art in this. We'll get to him later, but he's always like, this is kind of one of his earlier books, right? Because I think nowadays he's kind of known as one of those artists who kind of goes wild and does like really crazy, scratchy, kind of horror-y type stuff. And this is him a little bit more restrained, but it does work really well, I think.
I know him from like Spectacular Spider-Man around the Clone Saga. Does he have a Daredevil history? Is that where he's primarily known for? And Elektra?
I don't think he did
Elektra.
Daredevil, but he did do Elektra Assassin.
One
Okay.
with Frank Miller. Yeah, that one's crazy good. At least the art is.
And he did
this
like
looks
some
good.
Black Widow miniseries in the 2000s that I liked. And he inked Sal Buscema. That's why that art was not very good. It was Sal Buscema on Spectacular Spider-Man, but it was his inks. I think he's a great artist. Good Twitter follow.
Yeah,
We'll talk about it as we go.
great. And the guy who wrote this is Doug Moench, who was actually the guy who created Moon Knight back in one of their horror series, the werewolf one.
Werewolf
maybe?
by Night from 1975.
Yeah, that's when he was created. Which I gotta say, I didn't really talk about my experience with Moon Knight. I've read a little bit of the more modern stuff. I read a little bit of the Huston series from like the mid 2000s,
Yeah.
that had
which I
good
don't think I
art.
ever finished. It did
That-
with
Was that the
I
Finch?
think.
David Finch?
Yeah, really nice art. And I also read more recently. I think it was Jeff Lemire who had
That
a Moon Knight
just
series, which
ended
was-
last year. Yeah.
I read the beginning of that, which was really crazy. Delved a lot into sort of his psychotic issues, which I'm like, all right, this is a cool little story. And so I was curious to learn a little bit more about his backstory and how we get there. And so this is Doug Moench. I think did I say that right? I think.
Yeah.
Who wrote a lot of Batman. I think
And Godzilla.
He
from
wrote that
Marvel.
Godzilla.
Yeah,
This-
he's very obviously a Batman writer.
Yeah, which works because this is kind of like a Batman for Marvel.
And Denny O'Neil's the editor on this book.
Yeah.
Hmm.
There's a lot going on there. But I gotta say, this felt like the least like a Marvel comic than any comic that we have read. Actually, I know this is from 1980. We're reading the first 6 issues here. This felt like the oldest comic that we have ever read. It had a very golden age feel to it. Very kind of pulpy, adventure-y, more focus on like the plots and the twists rather than the characters at all.
Yeah, I mean, these issues are all done in ones, and they're all over the map. Like one's kind of like a noiry pre-Frank Miller on Daredevil, right? Story
well,
that
it's right when he's starting.
Yeah, so it's kind of contemporary with that. So it's a little self-serious, but then there's stories that almost feel like periphery to Moon Knight that feel like they're just wanting to tell a story, just like a random like Sandman or Vertigo type story. And they just happens to feature Moon Knight in the background. I think issue 4 or 5 was that way.
Yeah. There's one issue which we'll get to that it could be like a issue of like Weird Tales.
Yeah,
I definitely yeah. The first issue kind of does the origin. I guess we've seen the origin before, maybe.
Well, so according to the publication history, Moon Knight first appeared in 1975 in Werewolf by Night as a villain set forth by this group called the Committee, who will come into play a little later. And then he was the backup strip in like a Hulk magazine or something.
Oh.
And so that's where he was hanging out for several years before he finally got his own book.
And that's really like that's where the sort of weird done in one spirit kind of comes from, because those books, I don't even know if those were in continuity. I think they sort of were, but it's Sienkiewicz. His art is amazing in those books. Like it's even better than it is in these books, which I think is great.
Oh, all right.
But it's really like it's very detailed. I don't think that was a monthly comic, and it was only like 10-page stories, so it would just be like a one-off of like what's this this different phase of Mark Spector up to this month kind of thing. And so they were really interesting little done in ones. I feel like it was just the right amount of story, and then these books have a little bit too much.
They are quite dense.
There's a lot going on here. So this first issue really made my head spin a little bit. We should sort of lay the groundwork of his origin and what's going on. Mark Spector, aka Moon Knight, before he was Moon Knight, was like a mercenary, and he and his friend Frenchie, they are working for this guy named Bushman, and Bushman is like just a bad dude. Also, weird name for this guy, but he's got like a white face kind of mask painted on. He's just an overall asshole, like raiding villages, killing people needlessly, that kind of thing. And Mark Spector's like, I don't know if we should be working for this guy. And then Bushman goes and kills some old man who, like, I don't know why. His daughter was there, and his daughter's like, oh no, Mark Spector, you killed my dad. Whatever. Also, at this point, does Bushman kill Mark Spector?
He leaves him in the desert to die.
Yeah, and he is pretty much dead, but this statue of this, is it Egyptian? This Egyptian god?
Yes.
Khonshu, Khonshu, who's like the spirit of the moon. It's not really particularly well explained, but brings him back to life. And he puts on this cowl, and he's like, I'm ready to go. And pretty much before you know it, like, I guess a few other things happen. He goes and he fights some people, but he doesn't get Bushman. But Marlene does make friends with him, this old man's daughter. Marlene's the daughter, and says, all right, I'm going to be your girlfriend now because you didn't kill my dad. And then we fast forward, all of a sudden, over what I would say is maybe the more interesting part of the origin, where he all of a sudden has 3 different personalities on top of Moon Knight. He's got his regular Mark Spector. He's also a millionaire who is Stephen Grant. And he is also a cabbie named Jake Lockley.
This happens real quick, though. I understand that Moon Knight has been like in constant publication for 5 years, but I didn't realize that going in, and I didn't realize that until after I started doing some more research, because I'm like, this is a weird first issue, because like we get all this stuff with the Bushman, we get the stuff in Egypt, and then suddenly it's just flash forward and says he regains his health and acquires 3 new identities. Okay.
Yeah, it's like, bam. Okay. All right.
But then he talks about his identities like they're real people and not like I'm just pretending to be these people so I can like worm my way into society. I'm like, oh no, you think you
very
like, but it's never really explained, and none of the other side characters, they think it's weird, but they don't talk about it like in a narration. Like this is like, is he Jake or is he Moon Knight right now, or is he Mark, or is he Stephen Grant? Because it doesn't seem like he's just pretending. Like, he thinks he is Stephen Grant now, but then he thinks like, no, I got to be Jake Lockley, and Jake doesn't like it when I do this.
I actually kind of like that because none of the other characters know him well enough, but Marlene is like, something is wrong here. Like, I think it's really interesting that she's the only one who is like, this is unusual.
Yeah, like, she brings it up a little bit, like barely. I know sometimes I complain about seeing like overly narrated thought bubbles, like people thinking like everything and explaining it all. This is one of those instances where I really needed some more of it because there's almost no internal dialogue or thought. Everything is just very explainy and outward, and again, very plot focused as opposed to being more internal. There's not very much internal stuff here, but we do meet another character as well. There's a Crowley, is that his name? A Crawley, who's like a bum, who's like his informant on the street. Yeah. And then Moon Knight goes and he gets information. He goes, finds Bushman at this club, and he leaves him for dead. Marlene shows up to kill, the guy who killed her dad as well, but she's no help at all.
No, that's not true. That's not what happens.
All right.
Because you think that that's what's going on, but then Moon Knight starts just beating the shit out of Bushman, and she's like, no, stop, you're gonna kill him. And he's like, what? I was doing this revenge for you, babe. And she's like, no, like, that's not what I wanted.
It's weird because a few times, like, towards the end of the issues, this happens where Moon Knight has, like, met the person, and she just kind of shows up out of nowhere to help him or, like, point a gun at the guy or something like that. She kind of comes out of nowhere in a lot of these books.
Yeah, she is basically his Robin, which is really weird considering, like, one, they're having sex.
So like Batman and Robin, okay.
Yeah, exactly like Batman and Robin. But two, like, she just shows up at the end. I actually think she's awesome, though, so I don't mind.
Maybe if I read a little more of her, sure, but...
no, but even in these books, she's really cool. Like, she's, like, the best, when you think about, especially for the time, the, like, girlfriends of Marvel, like, even Mary Jane, like, what does she actually do?
Fair.
She's dressed up as Spider-Man on at least 2 different covers.
But like once they get married, all she does is like fret. And like Marlene is like, no, like I'm picking up a gun. I'm going like when Jake gets jumped by the sons of the lady who runs the coffee shop that he goes to. She is ready with a pistol like immediately. And he's like, do I need to shoot these guys, Jake? Or Steven, and he's like, no, like,
whoa,
calm down.
She wasn't even willing to kill the guy who killed her dad, and all of a sudden she's ready to shoot at the first person who approaches Moon Knight. Like, I don't know about this.
What's crazy about Moon Knight? Well, there's a lot. I mean, like literally crazy.
There's a lot of traits.
But what's cool about him, but it's really hard for me as like a first time reader, is he has a huge supporting cast. And unlike most superheroes, everyone knows he's a superhero, and they all participate in his crime fighting in some capacity.
I really, really like his supporting cast.
It throws you in the deep end, though, real quick, because he has, like... I mean, you don't really meet them until, like, the beginning of the next issue, but, like, there are 4 different people who Moon Knight is at any given time. And then he's got like a 7-person supporting cast of team. It's a lot.
I didn't think that was bad. I know I tend to prefer team books more than you do, anyways, Vince. But I really like that.
I like the idea of it. It just was hard for me to center on because I'm like, I don't know which of the different Moon Knight personas I'm supposed to latch onto. And then on top of that, because like I like Daredevil's cast because there's Daredevil and then there's Foggy and everybody else and everybody spiders out from him. I like that kind of supporting cast more than like a team book where everybody, I don't know who the lead is. Spider-Man's always the lead and he's got a good supporting cast. This one's cool, but it took me about 4 or 5. Like I think the second issue where Crawley is kind of like in the lead position,
the main,
like that one is probably the issue that worked best for me.
Same with me, yeah. I think in general, most of these issues just have that problem where they don't focus. They focus on the villain more than anything else, which it's hard to progress the story overall when you're just focusing on a villain for most of the time, you know?
It's definitely the 70s and 80s Batman approach of like, Bruce Wayne has no character. Like, he is nothing, you know? Like, he's literally...
care about Moon Knight at all after reading these. Like, I would not read more Moon Knight. I'm sorry, spoiler alert. Didn't care much about him, but yeah.
But it's the same way, like the 70s and 80s Bruce Wayne story, Batman stories. Like Bruce Wayne is literally just a cipher who solves crime. Like that's all he does, and all the interesting parts are like Commissioner Gordon and like his interactions with like the mayor or whatever, because he's giving him a hard time. Because like Bruce Wayne has no obstacles, like he just goes and solves crimes. So yeah, Moon Knight is very much the same kind of thing, where it's like he has no limits really. I mean, I guess he's kind of just a guy, but at the same time, like I feel like all his supporting cast are more interesting. Although I do think that Jeff Lemire and the Warren Ellis runs that were before, that were in the 2010s, and even Bendis's run, which I don't think is very good. It is interesting that it's all set up in that first issue of like he dies in that first issue, and then they show the panel of Khonshu, and then he's alive again. So, they basically are like, the Jeff Lemire and that stuff is basically him losing his mind, being like, no, like, you've always been crazy. Like, you've been dead this whole time. It's been Khonshu kind of running the show. And, like, I think that's really interesting. And you can read it into the text without it being like a retcon. It's just kind of like he just comes off crazy in these books. But to say like, oh, actually, he's the Moon Knight is this Egyptian guy that took over your body.
Yeah, I think it's a cool idea to play around with, and I do think these issues do set up a lot to play with, because Moon Knight is left as such a blank canvas with, or like 4 blank canvases almost, that you could do whatever you want with. Like, that's a lot of fun. By the way, at the end of the first issue, he does kill Bushman, even though Marlene didn't want him to. Whoops. Oh well.
I feel like Bushman comes back, doesn't he?
Yeah, he'll be back.
Oh, great. In issue 2, like you were saying, we do meet the rest of his supporting cast with a little bit of focus on the homeless guy, Crawley. There's a killer, the slasher, who's out there killing homeless people, and
Skid Row slasher, who's compared to Jack the Ripper
from our last episode. Actually, the
connective tissue, man.
Even more connective issue. The first 3 issues of Moon Knight all mention Jack the Ripper.
Did the first issue?
The first issue
but
did.
But it's not a connect. But they're completely 3 different killers. Because I know that
they are. Yes.
Because in the third issue, they're also saying
all the Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, the third one is like, this is just like Jack the Ripper also. But not all. No, they don't say also.
Painting.
Yeah, he doesn't even murder anyone.
Oh my god.
He's just writing letters.
Yeah. There's like a guy killing homeless people, and Crowley almost gets hit by him, but he manages to escape. And Netta, there's a woman who owns a diner, Netta, who Jake Lockley, which is him as the cabbie, Mark Spector, is like making friends with them as an informant, all that sort of stuff. And
they think he's a narc or a cop. Like he always goes in there and is like, "Hey, heard about any crimes lately?"
Mm-hmm. So Netta is like, well, my homeless friend just got, almost jumped by the slasher, and I feel like this Lockley cabbie guy might be, more than he's letting on. So she sends his sons after him to jump on him, to get the jump on him, to like, hey, no, come see our mom. And that's, when you were talking about Marlene pulls the gun on them. But he goes to them and basically spills it all and just says, hey, listen, I'm Moon Knight. I need some informants on the streets. Are y'all in? I'm like, wow, this guy's very trusting all of a sudden. It's kind of nice to see. But
and I love Crawley. Crawley's such a great character.
He's really good. He's really good. Every time he showed up in like future issues, I'm like, is this another Crawley issue? Because like I like that one.
But this one's good. It also, I think, had the best twist where, he kind of was like, oh, I almost recognize this guy. Like, is he like another homeless guy I've seen on the street? That sort of thing. And this homeless guy is also like asking everybody these weird, crazy questions, like, where were you 20 years ago? Were you in Jersey? That kind of thing. And we find out later about Crawley's sort of back history, how he became a homeless person and how he just kind of like ended up cheating on his wife and all that sort of stuff and leaving them.
Betting on the ponies.
Yeah, betting on the ponies, lots of
He's
stuff.
terrible at it too. In 3 of these issues, he loses money at horse race gambling.
Oh man, what a guy! What a guy!
Try gambling at something else, bro.
Good idea. You should gamble something else. But we find out that this
Invest in savings and loans. They'll never fail.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. But we find out like right when Crawley is like set to testify in court, he's like, "No, I can't do it. I will not testify." And then he just like spills the beans, like, because that guy's my son. I failed you so badly, and, like, which is a weird way of not testifying and then also admitting that like there's a reason for you like to be biased. It felt really weird all being in a courtroom scene.
Well, because they caught the bad guy.
If I was the lawyer, I'd be like, Judge, mistrial, please. This is he's essentially admitted that he's the killer, but he won't say it.
Yeah.
And then they caught the son killer, and then he immediately runs out of the courthouse. They have to go catch him.
Yeah, he grabs a policeman's gun and like shoots a cop and then runs out. But of course, Moon Knight, he stops him and everything. It's fine. And
he dies.
Well, yeah, you're right. He dies. It's not fine. Crawley's sad. And the issue, like, I thought there was going to be another page. No, the issue just kind of ends with Crawley over his son's body. Like, oh, I let it slip away.
Yeah, there's no 70s, 80s text of like, next time, the flight of the Navigator.
Yeah. None of that.
Yeah. It's not like Moon Knight and his pals having brunch. Like, boy, that adventure didn't end great.
Right. But there is, I wanted to say, one moment in this issue when we first kind of see him patrolling the streets, and he comes up on some random bad guys, muggers or whatever, and he's beating them up. There is a scene where, out of nowhere, this is the first time we've really seen Moon Knight in action on a regular night, like getting bums and thugs and whatever. And he just starts going deep into this description of his truncheon, a new weapon that he has. And he's like telling them all about the mechanics behind it while he beats them up. And I'm like, dude, are you trying to sell these things? What's going on with you right now?
There is nothing funnier to me. Well, it's also, he explains that it breaks apart like a nunchuck, and it's got nunchucks. And there's nothing funnier to me than than American pop culture before the 80s trying to explain ninjas. It's the funniest thing to me. Like, there's a James Bond movie that also tries to explain ninjas, like where Sean Connery tries to explain ninjas to the audience, and it's so funny to me. And he's like, this is what ninjas use. They are the people, and they use a nunchuck, and it has this type of force. I'm like, yeah, I know who fucking Michelangelo is. We're good. I'm like, you don't need to tell me. But he loves talking about his truncheon. My truncheon. There's some drinking games that you could definitely make out of Moon Knight.
Oh, yeah. Anytime anyone mentions a truncheon, oh, man. Anytime he says, hey, call me by my other name because I'm this other guy right now.
Yeah,
exactly.
Constantly. That's the best.
Hey, I'm Lockley right now. Like, well, do you mind if I call you Stephen Grant? Well, I just got home, so I'm Stephen Grant now. You can call me Grant. All right, man.
I can't read Mark Spector's mail right now. I'm Stephen Grant.
So weird.
I love it. I love how everyone, like I said, everyone else, because he is like a rich white guy, everyone else is just like, oh, okay, that makes sense. He's eccentric.
Whatever.
But Marlene is like, what's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm. Frenchie is also still there. We haven't really mentioned him. Frenchie flies a helicopter for him.
He's Launchpad.
He's the Launchpad McQuack. You're right. It's great.
He has a launch pad. He has an Alfred sort of. He has Marlene. He has these the two boys of the lady who runs the coffee shop.
Do they have names?
I forget their names.
They have names.
I don't know if
6.
I read them. Okay, do that. Okay.
I forget them, but they do have names. But those two guys. Then the coffee shop person.
Is her
Crawley.
name Netta or Gina?
I thought it was Netta.
I don't remember.
I could have gotten confused.
But he has a very complex supporting cast. I also like, this is 1980, 1981. These books are surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, if these came out in 2018, a certain segment of Twitter would be like, here we go again, social justice, blah blah blah.
Yeah, there was a big focus on like the homeless population and like, oh, nobody cares about them and the cops don't. Like, it was actually very refreshing. It had a lot to say, I think.
Yeah, I was like, this is awesome for like by 1980 standards that they're like, hey, this is shitty. And then like the next issue, which we'll talk about right now, is like this rich guy is just bored and rich and he sucks.
Yeah. I do think that issue 2 was the best out of all of these. And then they sort of steadily start to go downhill again for me. Like, number 3 was a little more interesting. We see sort of him being Stephen Grant playing Rich Boy, playing the Bruce Wayne type character. Like, they're fighting over paintings, I guess. This guy's painting, stealing stuff. Oh, you're right, Vince. It was Gina. I don't know where I got Netta from. Maybe I'm mixing up characters. I don't know. I definitely saw a Netta somewhere. I don't know. Well, let me know if you figure out who Netta is. All right, my bad. It's Gina. It's Gina. I'm wrong.
Damn.
Damn. I don't know. Is there anything in particular y'all want to mention out of issue 3? I didn't find anything stood out as like particularly interesting for me.
I mean, yeah, like I said, I like the class consciousness stuff of like Stephen Grant meets this rich asshole who's like, you have to defend me against the midnight robber. And he's like, okay, but it's probably you, right? You're the midnight robber.
That's it. Everything felt like a little bit too happenstancy of like, oh, he's just going to happen to tell Stephen Grant about the Moon Knight, about the painting thing. And then Moon Knight's going to, like, everything felt very convenient in this issue. It was a little, I don't know.
But I did like, again, the ending of, contrast that with issue 2, which is Crawley like crying about his dead son. Issue 3 is they go to like the Guggenheim or whatever, and Marlene's like, hey, that's your painting. And he's like, yeah, I gave it away. I don't care about this shit.
Yeah, that was nice. It was pretty different. I do like that we just saw more of him personally, even though we didn't get a whole lot of character development. It was still nice to see. The issue after this is a committee of 5, where the same people who, I guess, had painted Moon Knight to be a bad guy way back when in Werewolf by Night, they're like, all right, we got to get rid of this Moon guy. So they hire 5 people to kill him.
Can we pause? By the way, Werewolf by Night's name is Jack Russell, like a Jack Russell Terrier, and that
it's the best.
And it's the best. It's so dumb, and I love it to no end.
That's great. I am not understanding why these people need Moon Knight dead, though. Like, he doesn't seem particularly established to me.
No, it makes no sense, and it's just an opportunity to retcon his first appearance, which was all about the committee.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, we created the Moon Knight, and then later they're like, actually, we didn't create the Moon Knight.
Because, like, I guess Frenchie created the Moon Knight in that story or whatever. Frenchie must have been like pretending to be somebody. I don't know, but he reprises his character and kind of walks in all hot shit. I like that. I like seeing Frenchie take a little bit more of the center stage. Also, Marlene, I guess, goes undercover and pretends to be a dancer who's trying to get a job at their shitty club or whatever. I don't know what that really had to do with the rest of the story, but she's there and she kind of gets like a little bit of sexual harassment. It was a little weird, but also kind of nice to see that doesn't she, like, the boss guy is like, hey, I'll be back for you later, like, just sit here in this dark room and don't do anything at all until I get back. Like, he turns off the lights on her. It's very it's presented well, and then it's like, okay, this is the bad guy and we know he's bad for these reasons.
Yeah, but it also, and it's because he does that because he's like, I think she's a spy. And then like 30 seconds later, when he's at that phone booth, he's like, yep, she's a spy.
Yeah. That's
so,
true.
I mean, like, yeah, he's shitty. And I mean, we're not supposed to be like, oh, good. But at the same time, it's not like she...
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it is nice that they're kind of showing him to be bad and sort of presenting that in a...
It's not like, oh, you have to audition for this role, Marlene. It's not like leery and gross that way.
I thought it was a little leery and gross. It was
maybe a little, but it's not. I don't know. I didn't think. I mean, because the Marlene is honestly a little bit exploitative the whole book. Like she's like doing exercises in a couple of issues where there's no reason for her to be doing exercises, where she's like, well, she's like a hot woman, so she's going to be like, doing jumping jacks or whatever. And you're like, what?
Yeah, I had a hard time getting past sort of her being more than eye candy for those reasons. I was like, all right, come on. Like, you don't need to be showing us all this stuff. But you're right. The more I see it, the more it's like, okay, she does actually try and take an active role in these cases, which is nice.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she shoots the guy in issue 3, which we skipped over, and she's like, I'm going to go undercover. I'm going to figure this out, which it is exploitative, but it's exploitative in like the same way Charlie's Angels was exploitative.
Right,
it's like she is active in what she's doing, and she's not like, the hostage that Moon Knight has to save. She's literally like fights one of these 5 guys.
Yeah, so which is nice. Cool. Also, I really like that Crowley is still active, like doing his whole informant thing. But now that he's on Moon Knight's payroll, he's still homeless, but he's like a hoity-toity homeless man, which is sort of like a fun wrinkle to his character. Like, he's very picky, and he like asks for tea constantly, and he like talks a little bit more fancy than he should, which I think is a funny wrinkle to his character. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I think he always did a little of it, but yeah, he plays it up even more.
Yeah. So basically this issue is these 5 killers who are all a little bit different in their personalities.
And one is Burt Reynolds.
One is Burt Reynolds. One is Boom Boom, the explosive expert. There is your Asian token hitman assassin who's a black belt in some martial art. Yeah. Bull, who's like a big tough bald guy. And who else? Razor Blade, something else, whatever. Again, way too much focus on them. Very much a sort of like backstory cleanup sort of thing, and so I had a little bit of a hard time, again, just caring about why any of this was happening, but the action was fun enough, and just sort of watching them like, oh, okay, now they're on a boat, and now, oh, Moon Knight's trapped under this big guy's body, and they're going to crash, oh, but they swerve out of the way, and, it was fine, it was fun.
Yeah, is this the issue where we find out that he used to have werewolf powers and he doesn't anymore?
I think it was the next issue. There was definitely an issue I was reading, and he's like, it was the last issue, because that was the one I was reading today, and he's like, I don't know how I took on those 4 guys. I could have beaten them, but I'm losing my werewolf powers, honey.
What?
I'd like, wait, what? Some of this book expects you to remember shit about Moon Knight that I clearly do not. And then Marlene's like, you still beat up 4 dudes. Like, yeah, but I didn't beat them up good enough. And like, it was also daytime. You shouldn't have werewolf powers during the daytime.
I don't know.
You're crazy, Moon Knight.
Yeah, it was like, very confusing.
That blood's flowing out of me. I think that blood's gone. I think that werewolf blood is done. Oh, man.
Yeah, because they mentioned that issue. They do refer to it where he's just a villain. It's totally. If you read that issue and read this issue, you're like, that's not the same story at all. They very clearly, Doug Moench didn't create Moon Knight being like, this is a valuable property. He's basically like a Batman parody in that first issue. And then he's like, well, actually, maybe we can make something out of this. I do really like, we haven't mentioned it, he has, instead of like a Batmobile, Frenchie pilots his helicopter, and it's crescent moon shaped and has silent technology.
Yeah, that's a nice design.
And when he is using his little cowl as a hang glider, instead of just sort of billowing out like Batman's does, it like deliberately crescent moons. So I was like, oh, this is good branding that Moon Knight's created of just like moon-based, equipment that he's invested in.
That is interesting.
Doesn't he burn moons on people's heads at some point?
What?
And not in this book. Not in this book, but later. Because everything I was reading in my research was like, Moon Knight doesn't give a shit about killing. He'll burn moons onto people's heads. And I'm like, okay, Moon Knight.
Okay.
Cool. Well, if you look at the survival rate of his villains so far, they're not great. Although I guess most of these committee assassins survive. They just get arrested because they suck.
Yeah.
Burt Reynolds tries to kill Marlene. She's the one that he locks up and is just like, stay in the dark. And then she doesn't. And then he's like, I knew she was a spy.
Yeah. I don't have much of anything else to say about that one. It was fun diversion. I think that's kind of how I feel about a lot of these. Fun diversions, and then not much else. Issue 5 in particular, I think, is the one that could be an old Weird Tales issue.
Yeah, let's get to that one.
I don't know what the fuck was going on here.
That issue honestly ruled. Come on now.
I could not get into this one at all. There was like you know what I think it was? There were so many time jumps about like, here, now we're going to flash back, and now we're going to flash forward, now we're going to meet up with these people, and then show things from this perspective, and so much of it feels like I really didn't know where to focus here, because there's like a couple of kids who are going to break into some old haunted mansion. But there's also a couple of bad guys there who are busting into the mansion to find this old treasure, and also we're following Moon Knight, but it's all at different times and doesn't sync up. Like, I don't know what was going on. Chris, why don't you tell me what you loved about it so that maybe I'll understand what the fuck is going on.
Well, what I liked about it is that it reminds me a lot of like there's a classic Batman issue where he fights a vampire whose heart is in a clock. And it's like what we know about Batman, like post year 1, like that doesn't make any sense. Like we don't associate Batman with like, oh, like he'd never fight a vampire. Like that wouldn't make any sense. But like 70s Batman, like there wasn't a rule like that. Like you could tell any kind of Batman story. And this reminded me so much of that, where it's just like, you don't know what's going on. So much of it reminded me of like a 70s like Italian horror movie where it's like, is it actually a ghost, or is it like somebody pretending to be a ghost? And if it is someone pretending, who is being the ghost? And Chris, it actually did surprise me.
I like how your frame of reference is like, he's like, it's exactly like an Italian horror film or a Scooby-Doo episode.
Yeah, that sounds like a Scooby-Doo to me.
It's not. It's not like a Scooby-Doo episode, because the Scooby-Doo episode is always you meet a new character who's like, oh, this is bad for me personally, but I'm happy with it, so it's fine. And then 20 minutes later, it's like, oh, it's him, the guy who it affects personally.
Yeah.
But in the middle there, you're like, is this a human? Is this really a ghost this time? Who can never be sure?
But that's the thing, though, is that in Moon Knight, it's like we don't know. He's literally says that he doesn't have werewolf blood anymore. So, would it be that crazy if it was a ghost?
Yeah, these 6 issues are nothing alike. I don't know what a Moon Knight book is.
Yeah, I have no idea. And like they're all written by the guy who created Moon Knight, so clearly he doesn't know either. Like, it is wow. Yeah.
I mean, he did write my favorite Godzilla series, which is like all over the map as well. So, like, to each their own.
Moench, who knows?
But like, it seems like he's just like, Moon Knight is a very flexible character. He's like, I'm writing this type of story this month. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write a horror thing. Is it October? No, it's March. Okay. Fine.
Who cares? Write what you want.
But at the same time, it was giving me like that classic 70s like Weird Tales vibe, House of Mystery, all those kind of.
That vibe I really love. That very pulpy, like that style is awesome. I just don't think it works well for me for like a continuing superhero book. These are all like stories where Moon Knight feels like an afterthought. I think I wanted more of his development in all these. I think the 6th issue. Sorry, before we get there, did we reveal the Scooby-Doo ending of this one? What happened?
We don't even have to. Listeners, just read it and find out. Be surprised. Is there a ghost?
Or don't.
Who knows?
Don't read it. I don't. It's whatever. I just didn't care about this. Issue 6. I was like, all right, here we go. We're getting more into the backstory. We're getting more of Marlene being like, what the fuck is up with your personalities? And he gets a letter from an old like war buddy. But it's out in St. Lucian, which I don't know, where is St. Lucian exactly? Did they explain that? I don't know where it is. But he's like, all right, gang, we're all going to St. Lucian. And so Marlene and Crawley and Gina and the kids, they all go out to St. Lucian. And they fight a bunch of like voodoo zombies, and there's this bad guy called the White Angel, who's again, it all turned out to be about a whole bunch of nothing. I thought it was going to be more about Mark Spector. No, it's just killing some zombies, fighting some guys.
I assume it's the for copyright purposes legally distinct from St. Lucia, which is a island in the Caribbean near Barbados.
Oh.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Why would there be legal distinctions?
I don't know, because they're talking about zombies and shit.
All right, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that. Like zombies, like traditionally are like voodoo based in their original origin, which I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that part.
Nice.
But they're like spelled like Zuvambis or something is how it's like. But I like that. I like that touch. Although Gina's kids call them zombies. Everybody else calls them by their proper like in story name with like Zuvembis, but not Gina's kids. They're like they're zombies. I'm like
yeah.
Good
well,
touch.
they've seen more movies than the other characters.
It makes sense. I like Gina's kids. They sort of get caught by these bad guys who are dressed all in black, but like painted with white.
They're skeleton costumes, like David Pumpkin's skeleton costumes.
Exactly, like David S. Pumpkins. That's right.
Any questions?
They're part of it.
And they kidnap people and give them heroin, which makes them look like zombies, and then they use them as cheap labor. It's a classic white guy real estate tycoon scheme.
It's a real good ad.
I just really
it did give me that vibe.
I did not care at all. And what again, this just did not feel like it was even in the Marvel universe at all. There's no usually for like a new series you want to plug it big and like, oh hey, Spider-Man's guest starring here, so you got to read it so you can see how he plays in.
You're right.
That is interesting.
I don't see anybody.
You're right. This is published by Marvel. This feels like a DC book.
It really does.
I wouldn't even say it feels like a DC even. It just feels like Marvel before Fantastic Four popped up. It's just like random nothing.
I can see this being published in like DC like new Teen Titans era. Like
yeah. Because if you were reading Batman, like you wouldn't see like Blue Beetle show up. It's like, why would Batman need that guy's help?
Yeah.
You know, like
people would tie in, so it all feels like at least a chance to like plug another book.
Yeah, well, I mean, Batman would have a stronger rogues gallery, but otherwise, there was a bunch of like done-in-ones and like weird tales.
I was just watching the Ra's al Ghul episodes of Batman animated series, and that's all over. They're good, but like he is just like chilling in jungles and very similar like art aesthetic to this issue.
Really? All right, that's I guess.
Globe trotting and you know, and
I wonder if is that the Denny O'Neil influence?
I think it's both Denny O'Neil and Doug Moench. They're writing Batman here. Like
it
honestly,
is such a Batman team. Yeah,
70s Batman specifically.
Batman.
Yeah. I was left feeling pretty disappointed by this overall. I thought we would get deeper into this. Why do these multiple characters exist, or these multiple personalities? And we don't really get much of that. We just get that they are there just because. That's it. Like they're very surface level. Every sort of character development bit throughout this whole thing is very surface level. And yeah, I wasn't into it. I'm sorry, Chris. I know you really like these, but I didn't care for them.
Yeah, well, and it's hard talking about a comic when I would say 85% of what's good about it is the art. But we talked about it a little bit, but Bill Sienkiewicz's art, this is, what we would call his Neil Adams period, where he is very clearly influenced by Neil Adams' Batman. But it's great. Like, it's awesome.
Yeah, it is really good. What's interesting about these especially is that because it doesn't feel like a superhero book at all. It feels like just sort of regular crime books, because there's so many regular just humans walking around, like regular people, no masks. And Bill Sienkiewicz does a nice job of like making it so that you can really tell them all apart. I don't think there were any points where I was like, wait, who is that? Everybody looks the same, like all these white dudes who are there. There's a lot of color in the book, which is nice. A lot of characters of color. Everything just really hit very well as far as the art goes. I liked it.
Chris, did we determine if the art had been changed at all for the Marvel Unlimited and like reprinted versions?
I can't really tell you. I did look at it a little bit, and I was like, I don't like this as much. So I think they did recolor it. It looks like I think they did a Epic collection like 2 years ago that did this run of Moon Knight. So I think they did recolor everything for that Epic collection. I think it looks a little worse because, like, I read these originally as Marvel Essential. For those of you who are unfamiliar with that, it's a black and white, basically omnibus that costs like half of what a normal one would because it's just black and white
and on dirt cheap paper.
Yeah, on terrible paper. But what's so good about that is it trains your eyes. Like, you recognize so much faster, like, if a penciler is good or not.
Yeah.
And then, because, like, you know, like 70s coloring or like 60s coloring, like, so much of it's so bad that you're like, what's the big deal about Jack Kirby? And then, like, you read it without the terrible coloring, and you're like, oh, he's actually a genius. And Bill Sienkiewicz was kind of the same way, where I was like, this guy's amazing when I was just looking at his art uncolored, and then I looked at some of the digital coloring, and I'm like, they really kind of sucked the life out of some of this.
Interesting. I can totally agree with that. I've barely read any of the black and white versions of any of those things, so I might be interested to check some of that out.
And Moon Knight's a good book for that because it's by nature, like, it shouldn't be a very bright book, you know? Like, it's like Moon Knight is his costume is just contrast, you know? Like, it's just white on where it's, you know, an absence of any shadowing, where everything else in the panel is like shadowed, and then there's just like white space that tells you where Moon Knight is. Like, it's a really cool technique. And then when the coloring is like, well, what if we put a bunch of like yellows and greens and everything on that? It kind of takes away from what's distinctive about the, you know, what makes the costume kind of pop in black and white.
That makes sense. Well, I don't think I have anything else to say about it. Vince, you want to kind of give your closing thoughts? I don't think we got any from you.
I didn't love it. I didn't really. Some issues I was kind of like, I'm bored of this and I don't enjoy this, and it's too long. It's too dense. These issues were dense.
It is. We should have done like 5 issues.
I'm glad we did that 6th issue because I wanted to see him be Mark Spector a little bit more, and that
issue 6 was probably my second favorite. Actually, I liked issue 2 and then issue 6, and then 4, 153, I think.
Wow, that's very specific. Good job.
But this contrasts because I was texting Chris last week. I went on like a tear on Marvel Unlimited where I just read all of the Miles Morales Spider-Man by Bendis, and I read literally 6 issues in 30 minutes. Because each issue is only 2 scenes, which it's good. Like, and like all of like the scenes and the dialogue and the character moments are all really good. It just is over really quickly. And then I'm reading this and I'm like, there are 3 scenes on 1 page. Like, there's so much in this book.
It is good unless someone is like asking for $3.99 at the end of your 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like, where I'm like, man, this is a ripoff. And then I'm reading this and I'm like, yeah, like 3 goddamn scenes per page. Like, and so I really do appreciate this. It's just I'm not trained for this. But it's a little clunky. Some of it felt like Batman parody in the issue 2 with the Crawley. Except it predates like super self-serious like Miller. So that's weird, but it feels like a parody of it.
I think Miller is a reaction to, like, obviously the Spirit is probably his biggest influence, but I feel like 70s Batman is a big influence on Miller too.
Okay.
So, you know, like it's, you know, the Ra's al Ghul, Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams Batman is then made like super serious. And I think there's some of that in this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't like this as much. I wanted to come in like saying I didn't really like this, but like talking with you guys, I'm like, yeah, this book was better than I gave it credit for. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it has a lot of nice moments, and that overall pulpy feel to it is nice. It gave me a nice sort of desire to go back and read more stuff like that because it is one of my favorite sort of styles or periods, I think.
Yeah, and I will say, like, you know, I've been championing this book of the three of us, but like a lot of this, it really just comes down to, like, I like the art, and I feel like there's potential in the storytelling. Like, I don't like Doug Moench's storytelling all that much in the books that we read for this. Like, I feel like this could go somewhere. I like the supporting cast. I like the sort of class consciousness for being in the 80s, that this is like aware that it has 3 African American characters is kind of crazy when you think about it. Like, Batman didn't have that. That it's in some ways ahead of its time, but Doug Moench is not the best writer at this time, or really any time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of potential to go forward with it.
20 years later, he wrote another Moon Knight series that won some awards with Mark Teixeira right after Black Panther. So
really,
yeah,
you
like
should have read that one.
It was called High Strangers.
High Strangers? I don't know anything about this one. Maybe I'll check that out, but I don't think I would keep reading any of this stuff from 1980. So yeah, I think we're just about done on Moon Knight. Any last words, anybody?
I don't think so.
Great. So next time, holy shit, is this our third anniversary already? Are we already there?
Yeah, we've already hit.
Wow,
we'll have hit
amazing!
3 years, mid-April.
And you know what? I think we're gonna continue that tradition. It's time for Batman Year 3. Speaking of all this Batman that we're talking about,
connective tissue.
Yeah, we did it. Batman Year 3 from 1989, which was 2 years after Year 2, right? Is that right?
Well, because Year 1 and Year 2 got published like within months of each other. I think Year 2 was not intended to be Year 2. It was just like a whenever Batman story. And Year 1 was so successful they just rebranded it Year 2.
Hey, yeah, let's call it Year 2. Yeah, makes sense. Year 3 maybe was more intentional. Written by Marv Wolfman, who's been in the game a long time. Was in the game a long time. Yeah, we read his Teen Titans. Of course, Crisis. Is there anything else of his that we've read? We should read Crisis one of these days. I've never read Crisis on Infinite Earths, which maybe is
that may be one of those ones where we do a 2-parter, maybe even a 3-parter.
Yeah, that's like a super important one.
Yeah, 12 issues, and I don't think they're regular sized issues, are they?
I can't imagine they are.
Oh, jeez. All right. So maybe one day we'll read that. I think it's an important part of comic book history. But
if we change the format of the show ever, we do like more multi-parts.
Here's him writing probably the most important book in comic book history, Batman Year 3, which is, he wrote it with art by Pat Broderick, who none of us have ever heard of before. So we'll see how that goes. I'm excited.
I think it probably came out right around when the first Burton movie came out.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Like a few months after. It looks like it was published August and September 89. Yeah, so that would have been like 2 months after Batman.
All right, that'll be a fun lens to read this through. Interesting. All right, very good. Well, join us then, won't you? Until then, for Chris and Vince and myself, Kia, thank you so much. We love you. Thank you for listening. Please don't go crazy. Please remember who you are. And that's it. Bye. Love you.